I truly believe she wanted to be the poster child for efforts to stop satanic ritual abuse and all other forms of child abuse.
Much like Gabby Petitot's Stark story led to society's examination of ways to spot and prevent domestic abuse, Kiely Rodni's story now places the world spotlight on the topic of SRA and child abuse, and her goal was simple: for us to learn about it, how to observe for it, and how to stop it. Kylie wanted to live forever in an odd future sort of way after she disappeared. She wanted to shine her light on Truckee and its plight, and for all of us to do something about it.
We'd know enough to want to know more, and that once we looked, we'd learn enough to know enough.
It's a hard thing.
And thereby we'd all learn what to do.
And it's okay to be scared. And it's also okay and important to act on that courage and to come forward when you know it's.
We've learned that Truckee, California is a hive of evil with decades of secrecy and is a forgotten land from a forgotten time long ago where adults asked far too much of their children, consuming their flesh and consuming souls. In sharing that information, we honor her.
This may be part of the reason I grew adept at returning to a photograph, video, or similar memory in my mind. While the physical world around me was untenable as a child, I couldn't be in two places at once, and preferred to live inside my head examining something over and over again until it finally made sense to me. Even if it took me years. And sometimes it does take years to get the talking done.
Kylie knew that we'd know enough to want to know more, and that once we looked, we'd learn enough to know enough. And thereby we'd all learn what to do. And she knew we would care enough hearing her heartbreaking story to be shaken enough to be sure she did not die in vain.
Dad used peer pressure in pantomime. Doing things because other people were doing other things, but nobody saying a word. This may be part of the reason I was drawn immediately to Kiely Rodni's sad case. There were actions that weren't in line with what was being said. Red flags were and still are, and there are red flags everywhere. Peer pressure is how things get done in this world sometimes, when people will do things to balance other actions without being told outright, just through pantomime. We learn this as parents teaching a kid to eat with a fork, acting out what we want them to do, even though the baby doesn't understand a word. We follow this in alpha personalities. So many mixed messages coming from the news media, the friends, the family, and townspersons in Kylie, Trin, and Dante's cases.
Of course I'm hopeful. Without hope, what is life?
People shaking their heads in dismay, looking away, as if this outcome was somehow inevitable. Looking away from the truth as it's tough to view in the daylight, provoking horror so profound those thoughts fall away from you if you only looked around enough.
Thoughts, especially like these, or when we're talking about the day-to-day activities of a group of adults whose parents and grandparents participated in lost trail activities. Lost, corrupt, and evil methods of raising children. Literally searing them by fire from a young age, creating scar tissue thick enough to protect them in their soon-to-be horrific adult lives.
It is a lost trail that has known results, and it's a lost trail that Kylie, Trinity, and Dante went out of their ways to pantomime as being untenable for them. Completely unbearable. That sometimes you just don't. That those lost trails cost way too much, and the density of practitioners in certain areas makes peer pressure once again a very effective method of exerting control.
especially when the offspring are locked in a forest for much of the year and often snowbound, and suffer from repeated exposure to peer pressure and threats from their abusers. The community itself exerting control of itself, along with an entire group of offspring through mannerisms, methods of worship, attending the same isolated school systems, going to the same isolated churches. Some family names going back in time to before the early 1900s, if you really wanted to be called a local to those devil's towns.
It is all too easy to accomplish in such settings through alpha male behavior. Once there's a majority that acts a certain way in remote, small communities, that majority wins even if the price is too high to pay. Much like the Manson family of yore, the situation in and around Truckee, California involves terrifying realities. Terrifying realities too horrible to speak of. Terrifying realities so prevalent that there's literally no one inside of the town who can say anything or they would become the next victim. That kind of peer pressure is the same kind of peer pressure my dad used to bind me. Dad warned me constantly after doing evil deeds that he or I would die if I ever said anything.
Through the Truckee way and the actions of the wolf packs that have alpha-level control over similarly situated townships, the same peer pressure can exist against that entire community of people.
Say something. You're dead. That's the pantomime being employed against these townspeople by these townspeople. That's the same pantomime my dad used against me.
That's the pantomime that forms all abusive relationships, and, if allowed to exist in situ for decades, that's the pantomime that can pervade entire generations of townspersons. Entire generations of harvested descendants of the donnerparty. The next crop being brought up the wrong way, using the same wrong methods, and resulting in the terrifying reality of being victims. Victims one and all victims of the combined gravitational effect of their own upbringings. In a self-perpetuating, never-ending cycle of abuse.
Victims who present their children as offerings to all, or they will be the next one deceased. It's you or them. Literally. And nobody is able to talk about such horrors. Let's categorize them with hashtags with a mere hashtag 17 instead. It is this terrifying reality I am convinced exists every single day in and around those towns. Bred into place. Bred through blood and pantomime actions. A terrifying daily reality brought across the prairies with the Donners and the Reeds and other wicked Freemasons. It is this horrific and terrifying reality that Kylie, Trin, and Dante tried to warn us of. And I pray on the daily that they did not die in vain.
That's why. If anyone asks me why I've spent the last almost 2 years of my life bearing these difficult messages forward, that's why.
Because they could not bear such messages themselves without using pantomime. Only us outsiders can. Because all of the locals are locked into the cult's death grip on these godforsaken towns. If a messenger I be, that message is clear. As clear as a bright red word, help, flashing on a neon sign. And those who have heard these messages are now the very best hope those kids have ever had or have had in years in terms of trying to not get killed, while somehow getting this word out.
It's our duty to bear this difficult subject matter forward and do something about it. Right now. Before other kids feel like they have to resort to pantomime. We must prove to them they do not. They expect the truth. They demand the truth. They can handle the truth.
I have shared every sentiment expressed on this channel in both content and comment with the authorities. I did that only after becoming convinced myself after over a year of research that this cultish evil truly exists, and that Kylie's messages were not only real, but very likely quite justified. When that became clear, I went to law enforcement. Nothing could have prepared me for this, though. That's why you folks need to call or send a text or an email to the FBI's tip line if you know more about the Kiely Rodni, Trinity Backus, and our Dante de la Torre cases. They are already up to speed on this channel's content, and if you send them a text or an email with more information or just hashtag 17, they will likely know of this link to her case. It could be as easy as a text message hashtag 17. On the Truckee 3 cases, it's been explained to me that it's probably best that everyone reach out all at once directly to the FBI. Nationwide, if this pattern of abuse crosses into your neighborhoods, going to local law enforcement with the information first might make more sense. Just dial 911, make sure your location services are working, and type hashtag 17 and code your call as one of a cry for help. You can easily get the word out through actions, just by using words this time, or by reference to this content, or by use of a new police code hashtag 17. If it's that easy, it's my hope the other victims will have a much easier road getting this stuff off their chests.
The road is paved in advance by the actions of peers of the highest order from those towns. Their top students. Their most beautiful. Their alphas. Their leadership. Those are the kids that died in the fall of 2022 in these towns as a way of sending powerful messages to all of us. And we need to help them.
They can't go after all of you if everyone acts at once, and the more the better for safety's sake.
We promise you that you won't get in any trouble. We promise you. There's anonymous tip lines even. There's
It would make more
peers that you
sense to
can reach out
organize as a
if you're
group at
nervous.
school or in teen-only groups, and to then get the group's word to the FBI, and it makes sense to do that well before then.
If I was you, I would. Even if I was a parent of a kid who lived in one of those towns. Even if I'd been brought up the same way. And I already did.
I am an abuse survivor. My dad was no saint. His father was no saint. My kids matter. You kids matter. Abuse survivors all matter. Do it for Kiely Rodni, Trinity
It's a
Backus,
hard
and Dante
thing
de la
to
Torre.
be courageous.
Do it for
And
yourselves
it's
most of all.
okay to be
Your
scared,
parents want you all to stick
and it's
around, please,
also
and to just get this
okay
talking
and
done.
important to act on
Please,
that
just
courage
talking this time.
and to come
All
forward
of it,
with
so
something.
there's no covering this up. Do it for Kiely Rodni, Trinity Bacchus, and Dante de la Tour. Do it for yourselves most of all.
My dad knew one day there would be a reckoning. He drank himself into the grave waiting for me to step forward and stand up for myself. He taught me how by playing Peter and the Wolf after his escapades. He knew someday I'd be strong enough to grab him by his tail and get the talking done. If you ask me, he knew that day was coming, and he wanted it that way. He expressed relief through pantomime afterwards. Like the weight had been lifted off of him before he died.
That's why I believe the parents are also victims, having not yet found a way towards reckoning on their own. Parents want their kids to get it off their chests as they know the offspring needs to in order to survive. Even your abuser secretly wants you to step forward someday. Part of their thrill-seeking is to see how long they can get away with their horrific crimes. And they are rooting for you. It's been 2 years almost since these kids cried out, and the time is right now.
Lift the weights off with hashtag 17 tips about the truth to the FBI's tip lines, and let's make a record they cannot erase even if through the sands of time. Tell them Kiely Rodni sent you. Tell them Trinity sent you. You tell them Dante sent you. We're rooting for you. And we expect that all hell's coming with you. It's just got to be that way.
I am like Kylie. You are like Kylie. Let's heal from this. Categorize this pain. And find new and better ways forward.
Reminding us to be kind, laugh, and sing, and that sometimes
It is up to all of us now.
it's even okay to cry.
My actions were controlled through Dad's peer pressure and made me do the wrong thing. It affected me unfortunately and took me 35 years to overcome. We don't have that much time, perhaps.
And she knew we would care enough hearing her heartbreaking story to be shaken enough to be sure she did not die in vain. I believe that all of us being shaken is part of what she wanted to accomplish. She was aiming for something as unmistakably memorable as Truckee's initial residence dinner menus.
Long live Kylie